Hi everybody, and thank you very much for being here today. I personally think this is the most exciting part of the day because those of us who've been sitting down thinking about things actually start to engage with our speakers. I would like to thank all our speakers who've given so generously not only of their time but of their thinking, and I think this is now the time that we can then start to engage with that thinking and share with them our own thinking. Joe, who's my boss, in introducing and starting off today, really talked about us not being able to do this alone, that we need lots of views, lots of different disciplines if we are to actually ever get to our aim of zero fatalities and zero serious injury. And I think this is really a great starting point for starting that thinking and starting testing ideas and testing approaches. For us as policymakers and people who design initiatives to address road trauma, this thinking is incredibly important. We aim to be as well informed as possible. Clearly that's what ECIS is about. And this panel session is really very helpful in terms of informing our thinking longer term. So, with no further ado, I think probably the only person that really needs introduction is Mark Stevens. He's new to the panel, so you haven't seen him before, but I know that his bio is actually there in terms of the paperwork that you've got. And also Mike Lene, is he there? Yes. Good. And Mike Lene, whose bio is also there. So, with no further ado, I was a little bit concerned when there was a lack of questions coming through from some of the speakers, so I've prepared a whole list that I was thinking about at the time, but I won't start off. Is there anybody that's actually got some burning questions in the audience? Oh, thank you, Alex. We've got one. Do you want to stand up? Do you mind when you actually would like to ask a question, if you don't mind just standing up? There's roving microphones, so we'll get one of those to you as soon as possible, but just let us know who you are and what sort of organisation or your affiliation is.
Thanks, Jan. Alex Colley, I'm from the Institute for Safety, Compensation and Recovery Research at Monash University, which is also a partnership with the TAC. And I just wanted to pick up where sort of Michael left off, because that's a really interesting concept that I've thought a bit about myself. And I guess on reflection and hearing Michael speak, I think we actually do know what the life impact of those serious injuries are. We have a lot of data already, both in Victoria and elsewhere, and the question is just what's stopping us communicating it. So, and there are things going on in Victoria at the moment, like the extension of the state trauma registries that Russell spoke about. We're now collecting data out to 3 and 4 and 5 years post-injury to really understand what the impact of those serious injuries are. So perhaps it's actually a question for the TAC or for Vic Roads or for the other public policy agencies in the state. If that's a goal, if getting the community to have that discussion is a goal, what's stopping us? We've got the information at hand now.
Do you want to make a comment?
Yeah. Alex, great question. I agree. We know an enormous amount. We know an enormous amount of what the impact of road trauma is across every road user group, across injury group. We know the financial costs. We have an enormous amount. I think, I don't know, I have a crack at the media, but, there's a role there. There's certainly a role for the media in messaging. I think of the great journalism, and it's great journalism of Graham Perkin and others and the campaigns they ran. They were really inspired pieces of advocacy, but they were led also by people in government, policemen, for example, people with real credibility. So we do know this stuff, but we can also shape. I think we're ready for that conversation as a community of, road safety professionals or professionals interested in that. It's about stepping up and having I guess we at Monash University Accident Research Centre have a critical role to play. Other research groups have a critical role to play in advocacy as well, but also other voices and the support that can also get, and pushing the media and what those messages actually look like. But I absolutely agree, we know a lot and we know a lot about impairment. And I think with Beyond Blue and other groups, you know, there's an opportunity to engage and start to talk about that message. And I think, yeah, it is a message perhaps also for the TAC and for other sort of, you know, I can see a strong media person in this room in advertising, and I think one of those things is, you know, there are discussions that can be had. It's how we actually engage the media to sell that message as well, who are committed to a very short-term news cycle of a story.
Sam, come on. I'm no media expert, but I see a lot of people at hospitals, and I don't think any statistic can encompass all the things we might want it to encompass. You've got to think about if we're going to have a serious injury toll, what really we're trying to achieve with that. And I think we're just trying to replace the momentum which may have been lost a little bit by the road toll not changing quite so much from year to year, and regaining that momentum about directing efforts to make this a safer society on the roads and better healthcare in my area. I think the public, it therefore has to speak completely to the public. And I think the public thinks serious injury is being hospitalised. And we can count that on a daily basis. We know exactly how many people get admitted to hospital after injury every day. And we can count it easily, we can put it together, we can publish it on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis. And I think that message will achieve those primary goals and be feasible to do. It doesn't tell you what the long-term outcomes and the costs of head injured and spinal cord injured patients are who don't die. It doesn't do any of those things. But as long as it sort of tracks with those things, which it probably does, and reducing the number of people hospitalised, not just dying after road trauma, probably does track with the number of people who are left with severe brain injuries in long-term care facilities, then I think we're achieving our goal. It's about speaking to the public, it's about keeping them on board, and it's about a feasible way of doing so.
I think there's probably a little bit of consensus. I think Michael Fitzharris really mentioned that is, you know, the decision probably is about why you need a serious injury toll, and probably the main reason we see we need it right now is actually for the public. And I think you're both right in that really this is not about all the underlying data which we have, which we use to make decisions in a policy sense in terms of initiatives. It's actually being able to talk to our community about what else is happening apart from people being killed on our roads. Thanks for that. I might move on to another area. Somebody else got some questions? Is that Ray? Yeah, Ray Shuey. You can still introduce yourself, Ray.
Thank you. Ray Shuey, former Assistant Commissioner, Victoria Police. I'd like just to put on record that we understand that we need the collective views of all the disciplines and collective input, so it's a team effort right across the board. But I'm concerned with I suppose, the lower focus on the human factor. And we all acknowledge as well that humans are basically a big problem in crashes, and we can have driverless cars, intelligent systems, fantastic roads, fantastic cars and that sort of thing. And yet we all, as individuals, know we're not allowed to speed, we're not allowed to drink and drive, we must wear our helmets and we must have our seatbelts on, etc. So the education issue is there to a degree, sitting in the background, but I'm just concerned that the mix of enforcement and education is not given a high enough profile in trying to address the problem, because we really have to change human behaviour. We can fix the roads, we can fix the cars, but how do we fix the human behaviour? Because we'll still have that as an issue for as long as society exists. So I believe there's a serious thrust, and the impact in the media really needs to go hard at it, right towards the human behaviour. So I'd be keen to hear comments from the panel.
I think this probably gives us a good opportunity to talk to Mike Linné, who you haven't heard from yet today, who's a human factors expert. And really, human factors voice has been lost a little bit, I think, in the debate where we've really started to recognise the importance of infrastructure and the right design in infrastructure, and also the ongoing importance of safer vehicle design, and then now the interaction between vehicles and infrastructure and the role that can play. Mike Linné, would you mind, I've got too many Michaels here, would you mind maybe having a little bit of a comment about where human factors is going and what role it might play in the future?
Absolutely, very happy to do so. And thanks for your comment, Ray. And I think, in all the safe system work, there is an assumption that there's a requirement on road users to be compliant. But I guess I'd like to round out the sort of conceptualisation of human factors to also consider the system in which the human operates. And I'd like to personally thank most of the speakers actually for subtly reinforcing the importance of human factors research. We look at the automated vehicle that Diana presented, the barrier ends that Clay presented, the red light running scenarios and treatments that Bruce presented. Human factors research is about impacting design and taking a different approach to system design. So if that's how we judge the success of human factors research, then we've probably failed pretty badly, which I hope is not a reflection on my career thus far. But with a look at the design that's gone into my little iPhone 6 here, it's evolved a lot since the prototype version 7 years ago. There's a lot of human factors design. Human factors has a huge role in most other system designs around the world. The road transport system is, without question, very unique. But when we look at airline companies, Microsoft developing products, there is another way. There is a different approach to system design that we can take. And I'm pleased to say that we're actually trialling a new approach to infrastructure design in one of our projects at Monash, looking at rail level crossing design, which of course is a form of intersection, and Bruce brought it to the intersection crash problem. So I think I'm not wanting to take away the focus on behaviour and compliant behaviour, and obviously people driving twice the speed limit or driving double the BAC. They're clearly significant problems that need specific attention. But I think broadly as well, or in partnership with that, there's a huge role in redesigning and looking at the way we design our system. I'd love a lot of the contracting companies, the road authorities, I'd love them to have the input, additional input into system design. How is it that a barrier like Clay presented can be let out the door? How is it that a Google car like that can be let out the door? I think there's some really great opportunities for system design. And, automation, well, airlines have been doing that for a long time. Air France went down because someone had a problem resuming control from an automation failure. So there are things we can learn from other domains with regard to human factors. I've given a bit of a dump there, but I think we definitely need, if I as a human factors researcher can impact what Bruce puts out there with designs and other traffic engineers, if I can impact what the vehicle manufacturers are doing with regard to the designs they're putting out there, while also having an impact on some of the more behaviourally based programs, then that would be an indicator of success. But from a design viewpoint, I think we've just scratched the surface. That's where the human factors research is going.
Okay, we've got another question. Yeah, sorry, I don't know your name.
I have trouble remembering it myself. Rob Newman from the Australian Child Restraint Resource Initiative. So many things are going on in my head right now to talk about, so I'm going to try and keep it down. First, fantastic afternoon. Tremendous presentations. I'm only involved in road safety from a child's perspective. And I've noticed over the course of the afternoon that there's been a bit of consistency in a few things there, and one of them was that it could take a long time to get a change. Now, I'm not involved in early education, but for anybody out there who is and has any influence, I'd suggest we put more into early education. because it comes back to what Mr. Shuey said about attitude on our roads. What's the famous saying we've all been exposed to all of our lives? We share the roads. Is there any real evidence out there that we share the road? Not much. There's a lot of attitudinal issues, and I think a lot of the systems that we've talked about today would definitely make a difference, but if we could start training our children about sharing the responsibility and the roads in a sensible way, 20 years' time, I think we'll see some benefits from that too. Is there any comments on that?
I'm thinking maybe Ray, Ray's looking at me. I'm sort of thinking this is really a behavioural issue, and I suppose shifts in thinking and whether we need it to create a safer system and how we do it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question that you raise, because we have addressed quite a number of public health issues by shifting cultural norms and values. Okay, take for example, attitudes around drinking and driving, which have changed dramatically since the 1950s, right? And they've changed on a societal level, and there's been a cultural shift in what we think, what we accept in that regard. I think there is real value in continuing to look for opportunities to change our cultural attitude toward driving. We tend to treat it as a right, not a privilege. We tend to take it somewhat for granted, I believe. I don't know what the grade school curriculum would look like, but I can say that as soon as our children are turned around so their car seats are facing forward, we've started driver education. And it would be wonderful if we could get parents to really accept that and understand that and realize that they're having an impact on how their children will eventually drive on the road.
I've got some more questions, but I just will make one comment. I think in Victoria we're quite lucky. We have a very coordinated approach to provision of education for young people, and there is actually a formal group of the road safety agencies that look after traffic safety education, and it does start very early. So there are a range of resources that start in preschool, so in kinders and childcare centres, playgroups. So there is some of that education going on. I won't go on about it. All I'm saying is that this is not entirely lacking in this state. It doesn't mean we can always do more, and I'm not saying we don't. I just wanted to acknowledge that there'll be a lot of people in this room who've been quite involved for some time in showing some of that best practice and some of the issues that Ray talks about in terms of when we turn around at 6 months. We do recognise that and have been providing education for some years around that knowledge. Ken Beer, I saw your hand up.
Ken Beer from Safe System Solutions. We heard Clay talk about the overrepresentation of motorcyclists in crashes with barriers. It's very interesting stuff. I'll talk to you about that later. But I actually want to step up a level and talk about the overrepresentation of motorcyclists in general, and take this opportunity to tap into the brains of the excellent panel we've got there about what we can do, taking that forward into the future.
Thanks, Ken. Great question. Everybody wants to say something. Okay, Diane has got something to say. Well, we might move through the panel. It's a good multidisciplinary question. Thank you, Ken.
So I have a really flippant response to that. We cannot do what Michigan and 3 other states in the United States have done in terms of repealing the helmet wearing law for motorcyclists. Let's just say that's a huge step backwards for public health, and definitely has contributed to the statistics that we see coming out of the US.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I wouldn't say that's flippant, having been in Michigan, and you can actually track in some other jurisdictions where they've repealed, and the number of people killed from head injuries has sort of exponentially gone up, and then the governor's gone, oops, and put it back in, and it's come back down. I think, Ken, the questions really can be reframed a little bit, because I'm aware of the sensitivities of motorcycle community. And to some extent, I really think they're valid too, because sort of the overrepresentation can be lumped as a single group. And I think we need to understand that motorcyclists are not all the same. Bikes are not the same. Sports bikes, off-road bikes, cruisers. We need, and we have a project. Mark Russell's here. We have a project to look at disaggregating the motorcycle crash problem, and the solutions behind those are different. A Vespa rider, one next to me, is really different to Ray. What do you ride? Like this monstrous thing. So I think the cruiser community is different. So the solutions are different. Yeah, I mean, Clay should talk about the barrier systems and so on, but I'm just making the point it's very dangerous to talk about the motorcycles as one single group, because your countermeasures have to differ, because there could be a really safe group of really safe riders. We just don't have enough information. We need to target our campaigns around that.
Okay, I just wanted to say
yes,
one
okay,
thing to that. Sorry,
yes.
Sam. And I disagree. From my perspective, motorcycles don't have metal and A-pillar and windows and wheels and stuff around them. And so they are all the same. They come into my emergency department with injuries that car drivers, if they're in the same crash, just wouldn't have. And they don't walk out of hospital when the car drivers would. So I think there are some things which are common to all motorcyclists, which is a choice that you do when you ride a motorbike. And I ride a motorbike, and when I had kids and when I became a trauma surgeon, I stopped riding a motorbike.
I'm actually I'm pleased that you've both made those comments, because I think the reality is it's something that Bruce said earlier, which is we have similar outcomes, but the precedents to them may be different, and why you're in the situation you might be different, but the outcomes are the same. So I think it's fairly common, and will probably be something we see right throughout the ECIS work. Clay, I just want to go to you specifically around this, I suppose a little bit around infrastructure and barriers. And I know one of the issues that has sort of come up from time to time in Victoria and Australia really is we know the benefits of barriers for the community more generally, but in relation to people who ride motorbikes, is there a better barrier system than others? Does concrete, for example, offer any greater sort of outcomes for motorcyclists?
Yeah, there is. I only presented data that we've looked at for looking at sort of steel guardrail systems. Of course, there are other barriers. There are a number of different designs, and one of the other competitors are these concrete barriers. And again, it's so interesting looking at the data for this. I thought I knew the answer to that. I figured, concrete barriers are very rigid, and to some extent, steel barriers have some forgiving nature. They can dent, so they absorb some energy, and the results were really interesting. Actually, concrete barriers are actually much, much safer for motorcyclists to strike than are guardrails. And I think thinking back about it, reflecting on it, it's a matter of design again. They don't have posts, so you basically hit them and slide along them, and you might be injured, but you're not going to suffer these really severe or serious injuries that happen when your body actually contacts these posts and becomes wrapped around them. So, just to answer this question, and you had mentioned about this, it's very difficult to protect motorcyclists, but I think the thing, and this is just my viewpoint, I don't ride, but I think there are things that can be done, and I think, and I'll just speak about the U.S., it's almost like it's become this orphan community in terms of safety where no one tries to do anything for them, and I think that's wrong. I think there is a certain amount of additional risk-taking that motorcyclists take, but that doesn't mean that they should die because they make a mistake. I think there's some things you can do to nibble around the edges of that. There are For instance, motorcyclists just going down the road suffer many more risks than we do as car riders. I mean, if there are frequently gaps between the road and a bridge, which a car rider never notices. Those are treacherous for motorcyclists. I mean, surely we can come up with a better design than that. If there are painted areas on the asphalt, which are great for a car rider like myself, because I can figure out where I'm going to navigate. Those have almost zero friction for motorcyclists, and there are high friction treatments for paint. So there's things we can do, and I really not to sound too forceful about this, because I don't ride like some of my colleagues here, although it looks like a lot of fun, I got to admit. But I think I kind of don't like the idea that just because they're risk-taking and because it is difficult, I think there's countermeasures that can be put into place. And so I'll kind of get off my soapbox here now. And I don't think it's a community that we should give up on.
Yes, okay. I've got two speakers who would like to continue on this issue. So Mark Stevenson and then Bruce. So Mark, would you like to...
Yeah, look, whether I say it's a paradigm shift or not, it really follows on with what Clay is saying, in that the future, particularly for our transport system, is really about protecting our vulnerable road users. And what I see in the future is certainly going to be a considerable increase in active transport, whether that's walking to public transport, whether that's cycling, and potentially also the opportunities that motorcycling will afford as well. And so we've got to get much smarter with how we consider these modes of transport operating in our transport system. And we're not doing that, I don't think, particularly well. We've heard what Clay highlighted in relation to our guardrails and our barriers, and we know that that's an existing challenge, but that's an infrastructure challenge. But there are some other really, I think, quite pertinent solutions that are technology-based that will afford some security to motorcyclists, and those are sensors and between our connected vehicles in the network, and we're not doing anything in this country, and I don't believe sufficiently to really move that forward. And there are a bunch of other, I think, elements we need to consider as well, and that's it's modal choice and modal shifts, and what can be gained in terms of risk reduction through that. So the challenges that you'll have heard in the past about cycling and safety in numbers and the concepts around that, but the risk per kilometre travelled as a motorcyclist, say in an Asian country such as Vietnam, is considerably different to clearly what it is here. And let's remove the helmet concern there. I mean, that's a given. So there are areas that we could begin to pursue and understand that really could become transport policies in this country that will afford, quite a level of protection, I think, to the vulnerable road users, in this instance, the motorcyclists.
Mark, I might move on to Bruce, because the issue that you started to raise, which is around autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, I wouldn't mind if we could maybe have a whole panel discussion about that, because I think it's the move to the future, and it'd be really good if everybody could get involved in that discussion. Bruce, can I just ask you to speak on the same issue, motorcycle?
Thanks, Sam. Look, a specific aspect of trying to make motorcycling much lower risk, I guess, in my mind, concerns the interactions that riders have at intersections. When we look through the data here in Victoria, and I think it's more widespread than just here, but we find that a lot of the serious injuries involving riders actually happen at intersections where car drivers, for whatever reason, fail to give way to approaching motorcyclists. A typical example, I guess, is at a signalised intersection. The right-turning car driver will just go across the path of an approaching motorcyclist. Similarly, a more minor side street, the exiting car driver will not see the rider and pull out in front. Now, one of the things that we found, I guess, from evaluating the effectiveness of TAC investment over the years in different forms of infrastructure is that there are two things that seem to work really well in reducing the incidence of that kind of problem: roundabouts they can bring about an 80 or 90% reduction in serious casualties, and motorcyclists enjoy pretty much the same level of safety benefit. And also controlling the right-hand turn through red, yellow, green arrows at signals has a similar effect on that particular crash type. And again, motorcyclists through the evaluation have been shown to have enjoy a similar sort of effect as well. So there are a couple of specific examples, but they're big, quite sizable parts of the problem.
Sam, can I make a quick,
Yeah, sure.
very quick comment?
Michael,
We've been doing studies of driver behaviour using instrumented vehicles for a number of years, and you know, we still see very clearly that car drivers are not looking out, they don't look in the right areas for motorcyclists. They're not looking in the right areas, they don't understand how they can behave, their performance profiles, etc. So that's quite a clear, robust research finding. And so I'm not suggesting we do this today, but there would be enough evidence from various sources to suggest that every car driver should have some awareness of what it's like to ride a motorcycle. There's evidence that car drivers who have a motorcycle licence interact with motorcycles in traffic differently from car drivers that don't, because without getting all psychological, their cognitive model is quite different. You know, they have that experience. Their experience guides them, you know, where to look and what to expect. So, you know, we've been doing a bit of work at Monash looking at not so much giving everyone a licence, but are there PC-based training programs or programs that we could administer to car drivers to give them some experience? You know, we know with Drive Smart, you know, young driver PC-based training programs helping young drivers in terms of where to scan the environment for risks. So I guess we've been starting to do a bit of research to look at how that might translate to this sort of environment. But there's clearly a fundamental issue in that car drivers are often not looking in the right place, not expecting to see, not knowing how motorcycles behave in traffic, and whether it's trying to change their cognitive model or, you know, some serious infrastructure treatments, you know, something clearly has to be done.
Thanks. Wayne, I've got you. Could I just close this discussion, just I suppose really for everybody's understanding, two issues that haven't been raised today, which I think we believe in Victoria are fairly important. Braking systems, so particularly ABS, but more so moving to autonomous emergency braking systems. We actually do believe that they've got a lot of potential in a range of scenarios, and also protective clothing. Well-designed protective clothing has a role as well. Neither of them are panaceas, they're not full solutions, but I suppose in our transition to moving to a new way of doing things, they've certainly got a lot of promise, and we've already started promoting, well, clearly we've been promoting both of those issues, but doing work in those areas. So they're two of the other areas that I think are fairly important just to talk about. Now, Wayne, I haven't forgotten you. I just want to make sure, because we've been ignoring this side of the room, so stay there. Jacinta? Yes. Oh, there's a microphone just behind you.
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. I'm a bit reluctant to ask this question, but I'm brand new to this sector, but I'm not new to engagement.
Welcome. You're very welcome.
I'm from the Amy Gillett Foundation, and I thought it would be a really easy job, and I was really excited about getting involved in road safety. I'm really disheartened because I've been in it for about 8 weeks, and the word that keeps popping up is this sense of entitlement that I see amongst my fellow bike riders and cycling groups, and this sense of entitlement I see on the roads. The Assistant Commissioner pointed it out in terms of how do you change behaviour. So I think if, back to Michael's point about raising awareness about serious injury, well, what's a call to action? Yes, you can raise awareness, but what do you want the public to do? And how do you change, no one will have an answer, but how do you change a sense of entitlement? Because I can't even see, I came from a bike summit where I can't even see compromise to get to solutions about a minimum overtaking distance, which I thought was such a easy thing to, and a rational sort of, but boy, have I hit barriers. So I think, I mean, I've helped reduce risky drinking with veterans, really difficult subject matter, but when you talk about the impact it has on their sons and daughters and their wives, it actually started to resonate and they reduced their drinking, and there's proof in that. But how do you address, this seems really, really tough. Seems harder than smoking, seems harder than drinking. I don't know if that's a question
Okay.
or a statement.
I'm looking across at all our behavioural scientists to see who wants to put their hand up. Can I just say thank you? Thank you. We welcome you to our community, and we're very pleased that you put your hand up. And it's not an issue that we're unaware of, in that we each look at, when I'm a cyclist, I'm a cyclist. When I'm a driver, I'm a driver, and we're sort of quite aware of this. But Mike, would you like to start the discussion?
As someone who used to ride a few hundred kilometres a week, not for a little while now, and wearing very little protective clothing, I was always aware of my vulnerability, and it's pretty easy to look for seat belts and doors, and where you visualise someone's sight line on the angle of their head. Same things motorcyclists do. I get really annoyed at some of my fellow cyclists on bike paths. I get really annoyed by some of my fellow cyclists on Beach Road and in some of the mountains that I've ridden up and down for fun. I think it's sexy to make a fight in the media. And I wonder if we frame the conversation around, we were all once a cyclist, our kids are all cyclists, and we're really vulnerable. And it's an accessibility, mobility, health benefits thing. I think we can get caught up in the negative. We can get caught up in this garbage about, not having helmets. I think we can sometimes lose what's actually the critical issue of saying how much of an issue this is, and almost this war that seems to go on. But I think we need to say how much of the war is perpetuated by a 24/7 news cycle as well, and there are people who are really ardent about it. And I think if we talk up the fact that it is a shared responsibility, it's a shared environment, and you go down this pathway of paying registration fees and all that stuff. You can just keep hitting barrier after barrier, and people put it up. From my perspective as a cyclist and car driver and doing all the things that I do, some of which are quite crazy, I think one of the things, it's about messaging, which sounds obvious, but it's about how the message is done and sort of counteracting the negative, the fight. And I don't know whether someone can go and knock on some radio announcer's door and go, actually, this is your responsibility to create this environment, because this is a social contract between us all. And I think that's a long-term behavioural shift thing. But if we sit back and go, actually, we're all cyclists, our kids are cyclists, is it acceptable for you as a car driver? I'm constantly, where I live, there's lots of private schools, and I'm constantly amazed by mums dropping off their kids flying through a 40k zone. Now, if their child was the one that was killed by another mum, that mum's going to be pretty angry. And I think we can change a conversation around that as well. It's frustrating. But taking out the hell ride that used to happen, where those crazy groups of cyclists used to go down, the police played a really important role in reshaping that entire attitude. And that's also a role that can be played. And having someone really credible, like Assistant Commissioner Bob Hill, standing up saying cyclists do have a right to be there as well as a car driver. It's that kind of top-down approach and massaging the media, and maybe taking someone from a radio station out for dinner going, look, would you just take some gas out of this? Maybe that's one approach.
Anybody else on the panel want to speak to that issue? Bruce?
Just a thought, and I guess it's a question as much as anything else, but there's obvious problem when people seeing sharing as a genuine sort of situation. I suppose one of the barriers, I guess, I think to that is that the road often doesn't look like it's being shared very well. It's not designed in a way that is actually demonstrating genuine sharing. So I suppose that can be an impediment to people, kind of wanting to embrace the notion of sharing.
Yeah, can I just add? I think the key solution really is a design solution. we don't have an infrastructure that is deemed appropriate at the moment for our cyclists, and we're seeing that, and it's commensurate with the figures that we're seeing in terms of our serious injuries. And we're in the process of, I mean, I'm saying it can be, but I'm saying we're in the process at the moment of a large piece of research which is about how do we retrofit our infrastructure so that it is conducive to, you know, safe cycling, because it is key to sustainability, mobility in this city. And until we can actually, or do have solutions to do that, we are, you know, they're at incredible risk, and it's a challenge. We can use the usual sticks which are around our enforcement and our education, but I don't think we're going to achieve a great deal until we actually redesign. And begin to show that it's truly a shared environment. It's a bit like what you see, you know, we've got colleagues here from Sweden where they're operating, you know, in an environment where it's quite normal to get on a bike and interact with vehicles at a lower speed and get from point A to point B in a safe, healthy way.
Okay, I'll go to Wayne and I'll come back to Alex. I'm going to come back to this side of the room in a while, so please start thinking about your questions. Wayne.
Thanks, Samantha. Wayne Moon's my name from Vic Roads, a road safety practitioner that works on the TAC program, amongst other things. Firstly, it's enlightening to hear the medical profession, I suppose, and the advances they've made since the 90s. That was quite useful for me to hear. That was really good. I guess in terms of our journey, in terms of infrastructure, I know there's one person on the panel that's quite astute in research to do with roadsides now. Crashes are either generally intersections or in rural areas run off roads, lane departures into the roadside. We have an old standard, if you like, called clear zones, and I want to throw it to Bruce, if you may, to talk about some of the contemporary thoughts of how that perhaps doesn't fit anymore. So maybe if Bruce, you're happy to talk about that and enlighten others about how we probably should be managing roadsides, probably with barriers, but I'll leave that to you. Thank you, Bruce.
Well, look, I guess my response to the whole notion of the clear zone is in the context of the number of deaths, serious injuries that happen as a result of people leaving the road. And I think some figures I put up during my presentation, something like 35% of all serious casualties are of that type. And if you go into rural settings, probably the figures get up to be much higher, and maybe even more than half of all fatalities in rural Victoria involve people leaving the roadway. Now, we have worked for many years, even into decades now, relying heavily on the notion of a clear zone being the solution to this sort of problem. And as somebody alluded to earlier, that this is based on research from around the 1960s, which I think had a number of shortcomings in it, and we certainly know a lot more now than what we did, 5 decades ago, I guess, about the problem and the crashworthiness of vehicles and so on. So I think it's one of the areas where we really need to take a fresh look at things. Now, I had the chance working with colleagues at MUARC a few years ago to look at this issue and just see to what extent the clear zone concept actually met the principles of a safe system. And we came at it from a sort of a hypothetical or theoretical point of view, I suppose, and said, look, for a whole range of vehicles departing the roadway at 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees, etc., a range up to quite high angles, which may not be that common, but can still happen on curves, up to about 45 degrees, and a whole range of speeds from 110 down to much lower levels. So we actually calculated for the sort of friction of driving on grass or gravel, we calculated how far a vehicle for those various trajectories could travel in relation to the clear zone. And for all but the shallowest of departure angles, we found that the vehicles could be expected to arrive at the edge of the clear zone at speeds that were beyond the ability of the vehicle to provide adequate protection, certainly to safe system standards, but adequate protection to the occupants, even modern vehicles with good features. So I think that was, for us, quite a convincing and compelling way of saying we need a better way of looking at this roadside problem and looking at the adequacy of the clear zone. I'm not sure whether he's still in the room, but I know Jeremy Woolley from CASA. Jeremy, I don't know whether it's a chance to get a microphone to you, but I know you did some other work which, excuse me, was based more on actual actual events which
Yeah,
could be
look,
enlightening
one thing
too.
we've been spending some time working on at CASA, because we, likewise with the ECIS, we do an in-depth crash investigation activity for many decades now. And we actually took a sample of vehicle road departure crashes and simulated those and reconstructed those crashes. And the findings pretty much support what Bruce just said around the fact that we've identified 2 road departure types. Generally, it's what we call drift off, which are your very low angle departures, and then everything else boils down to the vehicle yawing in some manner, so entering a spin. And this is the most common sort of scenario. So it's possible the clear zones that we've traditionally adopted do assist with some of the shallow road departures in the drift off scenario, but for all other scenarios, the clear zones are inadequate. And even if you were to pursue the notion of a clear zone of infinite width, we suspect that the tyre soil forces are such that eventually the vehicle has a high risk of rolling over anyway, and that's where a lot of your spinal injuries and ejections and things occur as well. So we very much do advocate that an alternative approach is required, and I think the notion that a clear zone just by itself is adequate needs to be reconsidered, and whether that's a barrier system or preventing vehicles leaving the road in the first place. But certainly we are strong advocates of the use of barriers and perhaps narrower clear zones to arrest those vehicles when they do depart the road.
I'll just reinforce.
I'm allowing one more quick comment.
I did some modelling work in part of site impact UN regulation, and one of the things we looked at was ESC plus side curtain airbags as mitigating deaths and injuries. And while they'll knock out half, there's still half left. So that comes down to largely those kind of infrastructure solutions. So I think just reinforcing the point of what Bruce and Jeremy say, that those barrier systems become absolutely critical. And even for lane keep assist, you need white lines. So, you know, the barrier systems become crucial.
Okay, Jude, sorry, I apologise. You had a question before. I didn't get to you. Please, and then Hafez, and then I'm coming to this side of the room, I promise. Yeah, so Jude. Yeah, Jane's got one.
I wanted to just take us back to the future, if we may, to some of the challenges that Diana posed, and picture the situation that I imagine might happen somewhere between Fred Flintstone's level 0 and the Jetsons level 4, where we actually might have both vehicles on the road, and not only Fred and the Jetson family on the road together, but perhaps Pebbles as the pedestrian, and you know, and other vulnerable road users. And I just wondered whether and how we've started thinking about that transition period, and how the safe system might deal with that.
Well, yeah.
Can I get Michael in a way to start off, given that he's the one who's done some of the modelling work with some of the technologies, and I think he's probably in a way my learned colleague to the right best to answer much of that question.
It's probably one of the scariest things, and probably the most challenging, because there's a consensus that we can take out some of the safety features in some of the cars, you know, and some manufacturers sort of say, well, that's just impossible. It's that mix, it's that blend of differences in systems, in levels of automation that happen, that are really fundamental to the, you know, the problem. And you don't want to see an amplification potentially of, you know, of the road toll, how serious and fatals. But you know, that's a real risk when you start potentially to have these, you know, the differences in systems, and that actually enters us into an extremely risky period of time where we need to think really carefully about we want to go down that path and what it could look like as well.
Diana, would you like to add anything to that?
So the only thing I would add is I think that's where some of the work of the epidemiologists and the statisticians and working with industry, and I know that sometimes there can be a real challenge working with industry because of the proprietary nature of data, but if this is a path that we're going down, I think we need to have the best evidence possible to make the type of decisions that we're going to need to decide. And I think what I see, and we've seen this with other technologies, and I'm not talking specifically road safety, is that we could potentially have a really great technology that could come into the market, and especially if it focuses on safety and is designed around safety. And as soon as you have that first collision that makes it onto the front page of a newspaper, then public confidence in that technology can go out the window. And so that's where I think sometimes there has to be a little bit more transparency, or at least industry working with other organisations to actually do the fundamental work to get the data to ensure that good decisions are made. And knowing how long it takes for technologies to penetrate an entire fleet is obviously also fundamental to that.
Thanks. So one more comment from Bruce, and I'll go to Hafez.
Just quickly, I guess we don't know how all of this is going to play out. I mean, nobody does. We can sort of speculate and so on. But I suppose we can handle it in a couple of different ways. We can either take an optimistic approach about what's going to be the effectiveness of these things, and then find probably later on it'll be very difficult to pull back if things don't work out as well as we'd hoped, or we can be much more conservative or cautious and start with perhaps more of a worst case view of things and allow greater freedom over time as we are justified in doing so. So I think that's two kind of really basic choices, and certainly the more cautious way I think is a better way to go for some of these major unknowns.
Okay. Okay. I think. Oh, sorry. Yes, Carl. Apologies. I actually couldn't see you there. Bosch, we've got somebody from industry in the audience, so that might be useful to hear from them.
Carl Leash from Bosch. I guess I'm probably the only person here from the automotive industry, from a manufacturing or suppliers base, and as Bosch, we're a supplier of a lot of these technologies. Technology is not the only answer though, and that's something that we're very, very conscious of. We can bring all of these wonderful technologies into the cars, but if no one knows what they are or how to use them effectively, then we have failed everybody. And that's where I think we need to be very innovative in our thinking in terms of public education. I think the public education needs to start with how we train our people. I think we fail our children when we train them. My father trained me inadequately as a driver of the vehicle. I'm sure I failed my children inadequately. It's just a fact. I don't do it as well as the professionals. Why do we continue to allow ourselves, who are all inadequate, to train our children? Apologies to those who are in the driver training profession here. How do we get the technology information through to the trainers of our children and of the people out there? It's something it's been on my mind a little bit lately. We keep talking about a complete system. There's a lot of innovation happening on the automotive side. There's a lot of innovation happening on the infrastructure side. I think we need to be far more innovative in the person side, in terms of educating and training our people and helping them to understand this technology. And I'll add one further point. The technology that's coming in, the automotive industry is very cautious about. What scares me is the Apple and Google vehicles pushing this so very fast and so very hard, and kind of getting everybody really excited and wanting to drag everybody into the Jetson future. So I'm interested in comments from various members of the panel around this total system, not just the three different pillars of automotive technology, infrastructure technology, and the individuals, but how do we bring it together? This is where I think we need to be very innovative in our thinking. And what actions do we go away with from today as we hear these comments?
So we're rapidly running out of time. I'm sort of thinking the best fit for this is human factors, and Ray, in terms of sort of the driver training issue, maybe, Ray, would you be happy to start off, and then we'll get Mike to maybe talk about where human factors fits in?
Yeah, I can take a shot at it. I guess my most truthful answer to your question is I don't know. I think it's a huge concern, and I think it's a huge impediment to vehicle automation, because somewhere, between level 1 and level 4, at levels 2 and 3, we're going to have a real problem with training. On the one hand, we're going to have a real difficult time teaching people how to use the automated technology appropriately. On the other hand, we're going to have a very difficult time teaching new drivers how to drive well enough that they can resume control when it's required. And we're going to have a difficult time maintaining the skills in the experienced driver population who no longer has to use them. So, I don't think I have an answer to your question, but I do want to acknowledge that it's a huge issue, and I think it's going to be much bigger as we go forward. There are so many things that will have to be resolved before we can have automated vehicles, and I think that's one of them.
I guess in 30 seconds or less, when we look at other domains where automation is, like aviation, which is much more mature, aviation, a pilot now will tell you flying an aircraft is a monitoring task, and a lot of their training is around how to manage the failure of automation. So I think it's inevitable. Like we are going to have to think very seriously about what impact this has on training. I think technology can have a huge role in helping to deliver training, as well as being a focus of training. But the experience of technologies and how to interact with technologies, I think is going to become incredibly critical. And I don't know of any work that's being done to look at that. I don't know who's creating the evidence base that Diana and Bruce have talked about in showing that automotive systems perform well in manual mode and auto mode, and that people can interact with those systems really well. I don't know who's providing that evidence base, but hopefully somebody is. So yeah, I think there's going to have to be a rethink on the approach to training, particularly with the interaction with these smart technologies. I would agree, but I don't know that anyone's doing anything about it. Maybe they are and I just don't know.
Okay. Look, I'm afraid that we have actually run out of time, and I'm sure a lot of you have made arrangements post the end of the day. Can we thank the panel, whom I'm assuming will be around for a few minutes after... Thank you very much. I think Leslie might be coming up just to say a few words in closing.
Great, thank you, Sam. So yes, I'm just going to say a few words to close today's session. I know that some people were asking about the availability of the presentations that were given today, and I understand that they have been recorded and that they will be available at some stage. We're just not sure yet exactly what the format will be, but everyone who is here today will be notified in due course when they're available and how you can get hold of them. So just in closing, I've got 3 thank yous to say. Thank you very much to the team who organised today. I think it was extremely well organised in terms of the detail, the programs, where we had to park, all that sort of thing. Was very well organised, and that sets the scene for a great day. So thanks very much to the team who organised it. Second thank you is to our speakers. Thank you very much, particularly our international colleagues who've travelled a long way to be with us today, and has made quite a contribution to giving us a different flavour than it would have had if we just had local presenters. But thank you to all the presenters for the time that you put into the presentations, and so if you'll just join me in thanking them once more. And the final thank you is to you. Thank you very much for your presence here today and for your participation, for the questions that you asked, and the way that you engaged in the discussion. It was a great afternoon, I think. So thanks very much, everybody.